It stayed as a lot of people called it, the Bellevue Theater, up until 1964, and then the interest in the property was sold to another corporation who changed the name to the Rapids Theater. And the Rapids Theater is how I remembered it as a kid. And as many of you know, this section of Niagara Falls, known as the North End, was the place to shop and go to dinner, and the finest department stores were here. As time went on and different buying habits and living habits evolved in society, and the malls opened up and shopping centers, those businesses that inhabited these buildings all moved out to what they considered greener pastures. So the area became kind of a center for, as these buildings vacated, what seemed to move in were nightclubs and bars, entertainment places. And during the 70s and 80s, early 90s, there were a lot of nightclubs, and this was the place to go for college students and young people who were looking for nighttime entertainment. When the drinking age changed in New York State, went from 18 to 21, about that same time, the drinking age in Canada was lowered from 21 down to 19, and almost overnight, this area became a ghost town. There were a few businesses operating that continued to operate. The Book Corner. This was known as the Dome Theater. But to digress just a little bit, after the building closed as a movie theater in the late 70s, it was purchased by a couple of entrepreneurs who changed it into a nightclub called The Late Show. They took all the permanent seating in, and as you may remember, this building had a sloped floor. They put the flat floor in, enlarged the stage slightly, and turned it into the Late Show. And they put that big key-shaped permanent bar in the middle. It was a very successful nightclub for a long time, but it fell casualty to the drinking age increase, and eventually they went out of business as a nightclub. It was later purchased at a tax auction by a woman from Youngstown and her brother, I believe, who opened it as a concert venue called the Dome Theater. Now the Dome kind of operated under the radar. Most of the concerts that they did began sometime after midnight, and they had the type of bands in here that you could say might create a public disturbance whenever given a chance. They did a lot of damage to the building. As I've told many people, we also bought the building at a tax auction in 2007, I think. Kenny can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Anyway, New York State doesn't allow bidders to look inside buildings that are purchased at public auction, so we had no idea what we were walking into. When we came in here after we were given the keys to the place, I describe it as it looked like a World War II battle had been fought in here. The entire building was painted black on the inside, and there was severe damage done to all the ornate plaster that you see in the ceiling. There were holes the size of beach balls. What would happen every time they went to have a concert in here, they would rent the sound and lights. And you can see these light bars and sound bars. Those were brought in and taken out after every event. So when they would bring them in, if they looked for a place to hang it, they would just smash a hole in the plaster in the ceiling, run a chain up through to a beam, and that's where it hung. And every time they did that, they were creating more holes. On the sides of those columns that you see were gone on this side of the wall and covered with mirrors. And on this side of the wall, they were mirrors halfway down and just the bottom portion remained. The cornice all along the top, where you see the lights, about 35 feet was missing on that side, and all that coining along the bottom on that wall was gone. On the balcony, from the wall over to that second pole, the whole front face of that balcony was gone. So when we walked in here, I was devastated. I thought, how am I ever going to restore this thing? And we were ready to just rip all the plaster off. We were very fortunate and found a plaster company that had some employees that they brought over from Russia who knew how to make molds off of the existing plaster that was left. They poured plaster into the molds, reattached it to the walls, and then we spent 6 months painting by hand. Every bit of detail that you see in here was done by hand to what you see today. We also replaced the floor, replaced the bar, that's an entire new bar, put our sound and lights right in the middle of it. And then we enlarged the stage to double the size that it was before so that we could bring the biggest acts out there to the Rapids Theater. We are now in our 4th year. Our main business is concerts. However, we also do weddings and corporate events and things just like we're doing today. And we were recently voted on one of the internet sites, Western New York's #1 wedding venue. So we've come a long way since we started. When we went to do this project, I would like to give a shout out to Mayor Deister for helping us receive only the 2nd grant given to a private business. We would not have been able to get a loan. The bank said to us, we're not going to give you a loan to renovate that building unless we see some interest by the city of Niagara Falls in the form of a grant or low interest loan. So we applied, and that was right after the mayor had been elected in his first term, and we were running into roadblock after roadblock and trying to get through the bureaucracy. And finally, we had a meeting with the mayor, and he stepped in and took the bull by the horns and helped us get the grant. Without that, we would never have been able to be where we are today. There are a number, and this is why you're all here, there's a number of buildings on Main Street that are every bit as beautiful as the Rapids Theater. And we need to do something about that, and that's why you're here today. I can tell you this, that even though we've achieved some level of success here at the Rapids, we feel like a lighthouse in the ocean because it's very, very hard to get business to come here when they have the perception, due to the look of the neighborhood, that it's unsafe. And we have lost many weddings and other events simply because we live here, we know it's not that bad, but people who come from out of town don't know. They look at this area of Niagara Falls and they're afraid. And so they don't want to book events or even come to this part of town. We literally had a wedding all booked not too long ago where it was an out-of-town family. The bride went to Niagara University, had been in here for concerts and other events, and absolutely loved the place, knew that it was safe. However, when her mother arrived to pay the deposit, we saw when she got out of the car flying in from New York City, she looked right across the street at the boarded up buildings and just shook her head no. And she spent 2 hours here, and we showed her everything, and she said, this is the most beautiful venue I've ever seen inside, but I just would be afraid to bring my family in here from out of town. So that's the battle that we fight every day. We need everyone's support, and especially the support of our mayor and city council, which the mayor has sparked an initiative to have the inspections department really crack down on these boarded up and unsafe and condemned buildings. So I hope that this meeting today can spur some other ideas on what we can all do to help us all on Main Street. So at this point, Mark and Raphael have a sound and light demonstration for you. And if you want to take it away, Mark, it's all yours.
Welcome to the Main Street Symposium. Thank you to Mr. Hutchins and the Rapids Theater for that great intro, the great welcome, and the great demonstration. We're going to start off, we're going to let Matt start off by thanking a few people. We're going to jump right into the agenda to show you what we have in store for today. Then we'll jump right into our speakers. Trying to stay on time today, so it's a big theme, but we'll let Matt jump in right now, and then I'll be right in.
Brief public service announcement. We've just been notified that if there was anybody parking spaces that are not designated for parking, there is somebody out there ticketing. So you may want to move it.
When the mayor's here, she told the mayor to tell him to wait.
But again, I just want to take a second to just thank the current and former elected officials here coming out on this Saturday afternoon. It does show a lot about those who care about the city and who want to, make a difference in the city. But I also want to take a second to thank somebody who's actually not here today, but he did all the graphic work for the event. He actually put together the poster that was actually circulating online. He put together the agenda. It's my first time up here, But his name is Darren Cotton. He's actually a former, he's a graduate student at University of Buffalo. He graduated from University of Buffalo Master's of Planning. He did this out of his own time and his goodwill to provide us with those posters and those excellent posters when I had, free of charge. And I want to just, take a second to recognize that. But there's also some organizations that we would like to thank. Now this is a tongue twister, so I'd like to thank Creating Healthy Places to Live, Work, and Play program through Cornell Cooperative Extension of Niagara County. Say that twice. I'd like to thank Main Street Automotive, Frankie's Donuts, DiCamello's Bakery. I'm sure you guys found those back there. And then I'd also like to thank the facilities who've allowed us generously to host this event. Rapids Theater, obviously, Niagara Falls Public Library, Family and Children's Services, Niagara Falls Community Development, the Niagara Hub, and First Unitarian Universalist Church, located right across the street from Niagara Hub on Main Street. Once again, I just wanted to thank those organizations and people for contributing their time and their efforts to just making this happen.
All right, well, I have the privilege of going through all the fun logistical information. The first thing I want to mention, if anyone came in a few minutes behind, just before you leave, if you could stop at the registration table, jot your name down real quick, just so we know, about how many people were here. We have a good list. Matt mentioned the Creating Healthy Places to Live, Work, and Play program. We have brochures available with a map inside. Again, if you showed up a little late, you might not have seen these, or if you showed up early, you might not either. These are on the table at the front of the back of the theater as well. So please grab one of these before you leave. What we're going to do right now is just, obviously you know who we are. The Main Street Symposium was really an idea that Matt had, and something that came to fruition actually pretty quickly. We had the opportunity to bring in some great speakers, which we'll run through right now. And we have the opportunity, I hope, to have a great conversation. That's a big part of what the Main Street Symposium is. A few ground rules. I mentioned already once, we have to be conscious of time. We have some people and some facilities that they've generously opened up for us on a Saturday, so we want to make sure that we use the time as well as we can and get in and out as quickly as possible. We will have plenty of time for questions, though. There is a walking portion component of this. Between here, we'll go through the whole agenda, but during those walking portions, feel free to have conversations. Feel free to ask questions of anybody at that point. Feel free to get to know some people at that point. As I just said, get to know the people in the room, get to know the people during the walks. Stick around, try to stay for as long as you can. I know there's some people that can't stay throughout the whole day, but at the very end, we'll have an opportunity to have further conversations with the speakers and with each other. So try to stick around, and obviously we want you to share and enjoy it. Also, just a few points we want to make clear. This is not your typical planning process. I know that planning, that word in many cities has become almost a curse word. This is not one of those. This is a chance to discuss. We understand that a lot of plans have been put together for this city, for this street, for this region. Let us know about that. There's some people in this room that might not be familiar with those plans. Bring them up through the conversation. We want to hear a little bit about those. A symposium, by definition, is a meeting or a conference for a discussion of a topic. That's exactly what we're here for. We're here to discuss a topic, and Main Street Niagara Falls just happens to be our venue. A lot of the things you will learn today are transferable to many different areas throughout the city, throughout different cities. We just happen, we like Main Street Niagara Falls as our venue, and we hope that this can be a place to start. But please, keep that in mind. A lot of these ideas are transferable. So this is our agenda. You can see, and we'll get zoomed in a little bit here. We're obviously not going to be that windy and turny. If you can see the orange line on this map, that's the actual route that we'll be taking throughout the day. But for graphic purposes, we'll go with this picture. We'll start here today where we are at the Rapids Theater with two presentations. One from Mike Leiden from the Street Plans Collaborative in Brooklyn. Mike will be discussing short-term strategies as well as tactical urbanism. We also will then move into Chuck Dupree, who will talk more about long-term strategies, entrepreneurship, pop-up kind of ideas. So both very good presentations. From here, we will move, and actually after this step, if you look at your little agenda that we gave you when you walked in, there's two different agendas, and you'll see in this orange box on the left-hand side of your paper, they say Agenda West or Agenda East. That's where you're going to start. After we leave here, we're going to split up into two groups for numbers reasons. You'll split up, and if you have Agenda West, you will start at the Family and Children's Services Building, which is on the west side of Main Street. If you notice, if your agenda says Agenda East, you'll notice that we're going to be traveling back in time apparently because I made a typo. We will not be traveling back in time today. You will just, basically what you're going to do is follow the list, the order of locations. That's where you're going to go. So if you're Agenda East, you're going to start on the east side of Main Street at the Niagara Falls Public Library, where we'll have a presentation from Bernice Radel and Jason. They'll be giving a presentation on historic preservation and economic development. We'll be moving, if you start at the Family and Children's Services Building, you'll be receiving a presentation from Joy Keebler, who will be talking, her presentation is titled An Exploration in Community-Based Free Play in Pop-Up Parks. So if you have Agenda West, you will start at Family and Children's Services. Once that presentation is finished with, you'll cross the street to Niagara Falls Public Library and see the historic preservation presentation there. And the same is vice versa. If you start at the library for the first presentation, you'll cross the street and go to Family and Children's Services for the second presentation. From there, we're going to move down the street, and everyone will join back up as one group. We'll stop at the Carnegie Building, which houses the Department of Community Development for the City of Niagara Falls, and Seth Piccarillo will be there to present a vacant building strategy and have a conversation about vacant buildings. Our last stop will be a mix again. We'll have seating and tables available for anyone that wants to continue a conversation, and that'll be at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Niagara, which is located at 639 Main Street. Directly across the street in the parking lot of the Niagara Hub, we'll have a food truck available from Buffalo. The Black Market food truck will be there if anyone's hungry at that point. Please feel free. They're going to be serving a limited menu, but they'll have a couple different sandwich options, soup options. please feel free to check them out. You know, the more service and business we can give them today, the better chance we have of them coming back to Niagara Falls in the future. And I think that's something we really need to consider is, you know, more of this food truck revolution that's happening in Buffalo. So again, I said, you know, at the Unitarian Universalist Church, we'll have a casual setting, an opportunity where we'll have different sessions that will mirror the presentation. So we'll have breakouts. If you're interested in this historic preservation conversation, we'll have an area for you to go sit and continue a dialogue with some other people that are. If you're interested in the pop-up parks, you know, we'll have an area for that. So it's a chance to have a continued conversation. You'll control the flow of that conversation. It's all up to you. If you want to pop in and out of different conversations, that's up to you. You know, we'd like this to be action-oriented. If you have some ideas, share them, and then figure out what the next steps are. Try to define some next steps, and you know, figure out what we can do to move forward. So that's the brief, that's the nitty-gritty, that's the agenda. If you have any questions, feel free to ask Matt or myself. But in the interest of time right now, I'm going to introduce Mike Leiden to discuss the short-term strategies and tactical urbanism. So thank you.
Everybody, how are you doing? Doing well? All right. Who's from Niagara Falls? Let me see your hands. Most of you. All right. How about Buffalo? Buffalo? Yeah. All right. Some hands went up. Good. Who's heard of this term, tactical urbanism? Anybody? Few hands. Okay. Maybe half the room. Okay, that's good. I'm going to stall a little bit because we're still waiting for the presentation to get queued up here. But this movement that's happening around cities is one that's really interesting these days. There are citizens, and I'll show you lots of pictures and share these ideas as we go through the presentation. There are citizens that are taking action more and more with their neighbors and yes, with their politicians, with their cities to get things done faster and cheaper in a way that's becoming extremely effective. All right, here we go. And that's really what this presentation is all about, is getting things done. And you know, as Matt said, you know, as Tom said, cutting through the inefficiencies that's involved with the planning process. We know how to plan, but we're not so good at doing. And that's really what tactical urbanism is all about. So here we go. Come on. Technical difficulties? Is the USB in? There we go. All right. So a quick overview. I'm going to introduce street plans, quickly what tactical urbanism is in some detail, why this movement is growing around different towns and cities in America, some case studies, and some concluding thoughts. So this is the American city. You know, we have a lot of places that look like this, including Niagara Falls. You know, you are not unique in having vacancies, dilapidated neighborhoods, and feeling like you have a lot of challenges that are really difficult to overcome all at once. You know, we've done this for the last 60 years. And that's not to say that, you know, development is a bad thing. It's just we've done so much of this, and so much at the expense of our downtowns, that now we're left really understanding the impacts of this and how we built suburban sprawl, probably too much. On the ground, it's, we would say, dull, dangerous, and single purpose. We find there's a lot more economy, there's a lot more vibrancy, a lot more safety, a lot more energy in places that are more human scale. And yes, places that welcome the car, but also welcome people as well. If you think about doing just that for the long term, you know, it's really discouraging. You know, if that's only our future for our cities and our downtowns, that's extremely discouraging, and we want to do better. And so with our firm, what we focus on is repairing environments like downtown Niagara Falls, repairing places like suburbs to be more walkable and bikeable, livable and community-oriented. So our firm, we do a lot of these kinds of projects, but we also do a lot of research and advocacy. And for us, that's really, really important and informs our projects, and it leads to new ideas, one of which was basically what we're calling tactical urbanism. So here's some of our projects, and on the right there you'll see we do books, we do websites to share these ideas, and for the most part they're all free. And we make them available and downloadable on the internet. This idea came out of a meeting that I had in New Orleans with a bunch of my colleagues in 2011. And we were tasked with coming up with an idea that we were noodling on and bring it to the group to share. And my idea was, I was seeing all these interesting things happening, not only in New York, Dallas, San Francisco, but also small towns, where there's all this, this creativity to try and get things moving forward. And I wanted to share that with them. And they said, well, that's really interesting. We should write that up and then share that with us, and we can give you some feedback and critique. And so that's what Tactical Urbanism Volume 1, on the white there, became. And I uploaded this to the internet, and I went on vacation, and when I came back, people were actually sharing it beyond this little group of 20 people, and they were discussing it. And I said, wow, I think we really hit a nerve here with this, because the first book really called out what I saw as the limitations of planning and the need for more action. What I was documenting was how people were taking action and the impact that was having for the long term, actually creating sustained change and sustained investment, and all along the way, having more of a collaborative approach with the communities. And so based on that success, we did a volume 2, which doubled the number of case studies and went a little bit further into some of the research. So as Nabil Hamdi says, who's a professor in London, it's about getting it right for now, but also being strategic about later. It's not worrying about 30 years out, 15 years out. It's worrying about 5 weeks out. What can we do for 5 weeks and 5 months that we can learn from, and we'll get momentum going that we can all contribute to, that will move things forward in the long term. And yes, eventually, maybe in 15 or 30 years, you've built and built and built, and you have a revolutionized, changed environment or neighborhood. This is a plan of Midtown Manhattan. This is from 1969. I don't think I have a laser pointer on this, but you can see Broadway cuts through the grid diagonally, and in this image, it's green. Their plan in 1969, like a lot of cities, was to pedestrianize that whole corridor. And pedestrian streets worked well in some places when they were implemented, and many cities they did not work. But for a lot of reasons, because of the density and because of traffic flow reasons, and its diagonal cutting through the grid, they thought this was going to be a great success, to close it down to cars and open it up to people. But like many great ideas, it sat on the shelf for a very, very long time. To get all the stakeholders, all the supporters to get behind that kind of change is very, very difficult, especially in a place like New York City. But with this, in 2009, lawn chairs and some orange traffic cones, they literally shut down Times Square. The Department of Transportation had the vision and the will to say, let's just try it. We don't know if we'll fail. We may fail, but guess what? We spent a couple $1,000s buying cheap lawn chairs and putting out cones. At least we will know and we can move on to other ideas. So it's this sort of sense of experimentation, willingness to try something that was so important. This was a revolutionary moment, I think, for cities in North America. And what they found was it was a great success. Carmageddon, as we say, did not break out. People enjoyed that space. They filled it immediately, and it became a much more pleasant place for people to inhabit. And then they made it a little bit more permanent. They added some paint on the ground, some movable chairs, and then they started taking a lot of data, trying to understand from a traffic flow perspective, from a safety perspective, from a retail sales perspective, if it was going to be successful. And what they found was it absolutely was. They decided, wow, we had such a positive impact with this project, we're going to make it permanent. And so by 2014, they'll begin construction, and who knows, it may look something like this, it's a rendering, but the big point is that from 2009, 2014, short-term action is leading to long-term change, all through the initial process of experimentation, which I think is fantastic. And that really illustrates tactical urbanism. It's being willing to try the small thing first. It's being willing to fail, but also learning that you're not trying to find solutions from the very beginning. Jim Kunstler, who some of you may know, is fond of saying that he doesn't really believe in solutions or solutioneering. It's really about responding intelligently to challenges as they come up. As we all know, you create one solution and another challenge pops up. Like the gopher game, it's hard to address everything all at once. So being willing to be nimble and be responsive as things come up in a systemic way is really, really important. So in the process of building these projects out, you see this, the ideas get created, but it's really a build, measure, learn kind of feedback loop process. And we see where this is done quickly and iteratively. The faster you do it, the more you learn, the more you can take what you've learned and feed it back into the next phase, the better your outcomes are in lots of different ways. So tactical urbanism, really quickly, it's about vision, always thinking about the long term, but also figuring out what we can do in the short term. It's about context, having things that are really appropriate for where the projects are being applied. Agility, making sure it's very light, nimble from the very beginning. And in that, you find there's a lot of value. Because when you do something in a short-term way and it's a success, then all of a sudden, you've created value out of something and you can move on from there. And finally, and most importantly, it's about community. A lot of the projects, and I don't know if I'll get through all of them this afternoon because I know we're going to be short on time, but a lot of them are about working together with your neighbors, with your leaders, with your friends. It's about building social capital. You start there. We start with the personal relationships, then a whole lot else becomes a lot easier. You can break down some of those divides. Being out in the street and building something physically is a lot different, right? Than showing up to a meeting and hearing someone blab at you the whole time. And I think doing that is really what's been missing in the planning process, is the actual action of doing. So 3 overlapping trends: the Great Recession, shifting demographics, and the internet has really contributed to the rise of this movement. I think the recession is one of the key ones, in that cities and towns have had to get things done with a lot less resources for the past 5 years. And so there's been this will to just try things out, because what else are we going to do? The resources just aren't there. We have to work more tactically. Speaking of demographics, Gen Y, which is I guess the demographic that I fit in as a part of, is living a different kind of lifestyle. They're more interested in the places like downtown Niagara Falls, and less like the places that are out on the edge where you have to drive a car everywhere. And we have lots of research that's starting to document this shift. And this is one article from the Atlantic that was really covering this change. There's more Gen Y than there are baby boomers. So this is the coming trend. This is what's happening in cities now. This is what's fueling people to move back and want to live in places like downtown. And in this way, you see a lot of us who are very internet savvy wanting to create change using those tools, but also in that manner. If you think about the way that the internet works, it's instant, right? It's instant gratification, for better or for worse, and it's open and it's collaborative. And so we want to change neighborhoods that way as well. I'm not saying that it's all Gen Y focused or Gen Y based, but that seems to be part of the driver for this changing movement. And it's not just hipsters. This is a myth. It's not just the 25-year-olds in cities that are working on these projects. This is a neighborhood that could be anywhere USA, where the community comes out and they do a project called intersection repair. And they come out together and they paint their intersection and they try and make it more of a place to gather, a place to hang out, a place to share ideas. And one of these projects happened technically illegally in Portland, Oregon, and then it just spread as a movement. And the city saw the power of this. They said, we need to have a process that allows our citizens to get together and do this. So they changed the bureaucratic structure to be a little more open and say, okay, if you get enough people around the intersection to say yes, you can do whatever you want by painting it in the middle, which is great. To bust another myth, this whole movement though is not new. Cities and towns over the course of history developed very incrementally, very tactically, and very inexpensively. It was really only in the last 50 or 60 years where we consolidated financing mechanisms, we built things at a much greater scale, that we got away from that. So again, tactical urbanism is not new. This is Paris on the banks of the Seine. And those boxes in the morning pop up and become these little retail outlets for books, magazines, newspapers, etc. But this goes back to the 1500s. When these booksellers set up shop along the banks, much to the chagrin of the brick and mortar booksellers of the day. But over time, this became formalized. The city started to regulate the size of the boxes, how many sellers there could be, and on down the line, by 1992, the banks of the Seine were designated as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. So that's tactical urbanism from an unsanctioned to sanctioned change in a 500-year timeline. But what we're seeing now is that unsanctioned to sanctioned change happening a lot more quickly. Project from 1970, portable architecture. This is a pop-up park. We'll hear about pop-up parks later today. This is under a freeway where this is really about bringing awareness about the lack of public space in the city and the impact that the highway was having on the quality of life. It's really funny. You can actually see a little goat there as well. So it's really just a weekend-long demonstration project. This is Seaside, Florida. To get from this to this required a lot of creativity. To build something out of nothing, right? You can't just do it overnight. And what's interesting is this is a project that's very well known in the urban planning world, but not so much is known about the short-term strategies that have been used iteratively over the last 30 years to develop that neighborhood. It's all been about temporary retail and incubating businesses in a very low-cost, temporary way. And on the ground today, it still looks like this. There's still this project is not yet finished, but you see these little carts and food trucks and water troughs for dogs. It's very informal, but it's very, very effective. And it helps to incubate new businesses, and there's a low barrier of entry for things that are so cheap to build. So case studies. We have 24 of them in volume 2. Of course, I'm not going to go through all those today, but I'll speed through some of them. And what we'll find is that the way these projects have come into fruition is it's not just bottom up, it's not just top down, it's both. working together and feeding into an idea or a vision for the long term. And that's a really important distinction. For too long, our processes have been either too top-down or too bottom-up, and the two have to meet. And I think in some ways we have to redesign the way projects are delivered and done to make this happen and be realistic. This is not showing up, but we have this spectrum from unsanctioned to sanctioned, and that's the whole point. Of starting with some unsanctioned projects and moving to how they become sanctioned is really, really fascinating. So DIY crosswalks. More and more we're seeing citizens fed up with not being able to cross the street safely, not being visible. Under the cover of night, during the afternoon, as part of street fairs or festivals, we're finding more and more people want to take matters into their own hands. And here's some demonstrations of that. The guy in the upper right actually has a carpet that he brings around and he unfolds it when he wants to cross the street. Really, largely just to prove a point. Like, why should we not be providing more crosswalks? It's the most easy pedestrian infrastructure, quality of life improvement a city can probably make. Here's an example from Pittsburgh, where a neighbor wrote, "Dear crosswalk vigilantes, thank you, you made my day." Chair bombing is another technique. This was a project that some of my colleagues did in a neighborhood in Brooklyn where they reclaimed a bunch of shipping pallets from the waste stream and decided to make public seating out of them. And so here you can see the process. They made Adirondack chairs out of shipping pallets again, and then they decided to just drop them in front of a coffee shop that really lacked a public amenity of seating. And what the impact this had was the coffee shop understood. They said, oh, right, we should probably provide seating for our customers because they're a very busy space and people queue out the door and there's no comfortable place to sit on the street. And the city wasn't providing that. And what we found is that this is happening all over the city, where informal benches and chairs are being set up around tree pits in front of storefronts, and it has a really big impact on the quality of life, and it's also very unique. These things are all custom built. In fact, the custom built ones sometimes get made into permanent benches like this. Actually attractive, well-designed, and implemented by the business improvement districts in New York City. So it's sort of a small-scale, unsanctioned, sanctioned project that we've been tracking. This is a project out of Raleigh, North Carolina. It's called Walk Raleigh and or Walk Your City. And this guy on the left there is Matt Tomasulu. He was a grad student a couple years ago, and he went out with his friends, and he made these signs, and he hung them up on street posts. He said, our city's trying to become more walkable, but we've had this plan where we want to build more signs to help people navigate and know how long it is to certain destinations, but nothing's getting done. And so he decided to do it himself. And the impact of this has been phenomenal, not just in Raleigh, but it's been a project that's spread all around the country. And what Matt has done is created an open source template. What that means is that you can go onto the internet, download his template, and customize it for your neighborhood or your city. So it's open and it's free. And what Matt was able to do is he brought a ton of attention to the city of Raleigh around this project. The BBC was there, they're interviewing the city council, and eventually they came to Matt and said, look, you have to take those signs down because they're technically illegal, but we might be in touch with you soon. And weeks went by, and then the city council reached back out to him and said, hey Matt, we created a temporary pilot signing program, you can now go put the signs back up. Right? So Matt's action, Matt's interest in doing something for the civic good led to a change at the city level to then institutionalize the ability to test out ideas like wayfinding signs. Small action, very expensive, but it led to some longer term change, and it inspired the local politicians to support this idea, to become a little more flexible in how projects could be delivered. Oyster Bay, New York, this is a project that we worked on. Some of you may know it. It's a North Shore town in Long Island. And Long Island's a place right now that is experiencing a lot of brain drain. A lot of young people don't move back. And this whole design competition was set up to get ideas for replanning and revisioning all of Long Island. And as a planner, that gets to be really an exciting exercise. And usually design competitions of that scale are just that, just an exercise. So we wanted to actually go out and build something and then document that process and submit that as a project. Hopefully to have some sort of impact on the ground. And what we found was that over the course of a couple weeks of planning, we got a lot of people on board, we got a lot of donated materials, we got people talking together again to build some things out in the street and to join us in creating this project. And lo and behold, Billy Joel came out. He happens to live in this town. And he brought his antique motorcycle collection down to the main street for these 2 days. And he loved what was happening. He loved the vacant space that he put his motorcycles in front of. And so what Billy decided to do was actually set up a museum in that vacant space. And then 2 new restaurants that were also pop-ups became permanent because they saw the potential of this block as well. The farmers market that we had open just for the 2 days, which was the very first in downtown Oyster Bay, became permanent within a month. And the Main Street Association estimated within 1 year's time the impact of this weekend project was $1 million. Especially with the Billy Joel Motorcycle Museum, it's a regional destination. People want to come into downtown, go to the city's motorcycle collection, eat food, etc. So it's had a really lasting impact. And we didn't win the design competition, but I don't think any of the other designs actually had a long-term effect like this did. And so that just sort of corroborated our point that action-oriented planning can be really successful when it's pulled off with the community. Slow slide. So Memphis, they've done this similar kind of thing. This is really a process that's called Build a Better Block. It was pioneered by some guys and gals in Dallas. And this project here, they did the same kind of thing. They took a vacant few blocks in Memphis and they decided to do a lot of different action-oriented events. They built this temporary bike lane. You see there in green. They had pop-up restaurants, etc. So they had 15,000 people come out for the event. People really want to see Memphis turn around. And so within a couple of years' time, they've now documented the impact that has stemmed from that initiative. It's been $8 million worth of new investment. Now, it's not entirely because of this weekend event, which they call the New Face for Broad. It was done on Broad Avenue. But the energy and the opportunities that entrepreneurs saw in this largely derelict district became very apparent, and it inspired all this action. And the bike lane there that you see was temporarily painted in to prove a point that we need more bike infrastructure in the city. Helped leverage what's called a Green Lane Project Grant, which is a national grant, which is helping them take that temporary bike lane and make it permanent, building out real infrastructure. And this project was only meant to happen for the weekend, but the neighborhood loved it so much that it's still on the ground today if you go there. So short-term action and long-term change. And now the city, this is a quote from the mayor, I don't know if you're going to read that or not, but the mayor really wants to start using smaller scale actions like this to create the long-term change. You know, it's not all about the big stadium or the big, silver bullet kind of projects. Those are very few and far between and difficult to pull off and oftentimes not successful. So he wants much more of these small-scale, neighborhood-oriented incubator projects to create economic development. And that's their new approach in Memphis, which is, for a long time, has been a struggling city. How am I doing my time? Anybody know? No? Okay, I'm going to 9 more minutes. Here's a project we call Futuretizing in El Paso, Texas. El Paso once had a fantastic streetcar system all over the downtown and the core neighborhoods. And like many cities, they removed it in the 1960s. Until recently, a street artist named Peter Swarzbein decided to use his senior thesis project to create a fake advertising campaign telling everybody in El Paso that the streetcar was coming back. Right? And so that's what we call futuretizing, advertising the future. Or as Peter says, if you can't imagine a better future, you can't have a better future. And so he put up all these posters. He had fake train conductors, waving their hands. He got a lot of attention, a lot of press all over the city. And all of a sudden, it contributed to this new civic dialogue on, hey, why don't we bring back those streetcars? That could be a great amenity and help target new investment. We know we have transportation issues in the city. It would be a very environmentally friendly thing to do. And so within a year's time, the Texas DOT got on board and gave the city a $90 million grant to go and implement the streetcar. So this was not on the table for discussion until Peter really brought awareness to the issue through his street art and through working with a lot of different artists, both in Juarez and also in El Paso, the border cities. Which is interesting. There you can see the plan for the line. It's connecting the university with the downtown. Parking. We see all sorts of creative ways we can repurpose parking spaces. This is Parking Day. It's an event that happens every year on the third Friday of September in towns and cities around the world. But it started in San Francisco with just a very cheeky sort of demonstration project where a couple of designers and activists went out and they started feeding the meter. And instead of putting a car there, they put a little park. They put a bench, a little bit of grass, and a chair. And for whatever reason, it just went viral around the internet and inspired a lot of other people in different cities to do the exact same thing. And then they started to coordinate the action, like I said, on an annual basis. And so there's, I think, 800 or 900 cities that did it last year all together at once. But what's really interesting is that this idea inspired more permanent change at the street level in San Francisco, what they call a parklet. So it's taking a parking space or two and extending the public space, extending the sidewalk with usually it's wood or temporary materials, low-cost materials to just enrich the public realm. And these are all public spaces. And this has just exploded with the interest from all these different cities. Vancouver calls it Parallel Park. In Long Beach, the first one that opened, the restaurant that's associated with it, they had to hire 4 new people within a month, which is amazing. I mean, there's really small scale things that have ripple effects. This is the mayor right there in the coat and tie there. He's 25 or 26. It's the mayor of Ithaca. He got really excited about parklets, and he turned his own parking space at City Hall into a little public space, right? To prove a point. He walks to work, and so he wanted to bring this change and make it more visible to his constituents. So anyways, I'm going to just go through. There's lots of great ideas that are out there, and several of them are in the case studies that are in the book. And if you follow us on Facebook, we post things every 2 or 3 days, actually 2 or 3 times a day, I should say, on new tactics, new ideas, new projects that are happening. I'm just going to get to the end here with some concluding thoughts. I don't want to keep us on time. All right, so maybe I'll just end with this project, which is one that we did in Miami. There had a downtown master plan that was calling for the transformation of 6 medians that were 100 feet wide that were used for parking in the downtown into a public space. They wanted to return the parking spaces back into green spaces. And that idea has been floating around in downtown Miami for many, many years. But again, no action was taken. There was no leadership. And so we were very fortunate to work with about 30 organizations in the downtown, also including businesses. And we got a small grant to build this out for 1 week. It's kind of taking the idea of the parklet and scaling it up a bit. And so there was our little plan that my business partner drew up in a couple hours. He said, okay, it's going to look something like this. And you can see on the left there, those medians, you're looking at an aerial image. There's the park on the right, the parking lots are in the middle, and then the downtown on the left. And so we really wanted to knit this space back together. And so this is what it looked like in the morning that we undertook the intervention. And then in less than a few hours, it looked like that. The before and after. Very low-cost project, very community-oriented. We programmed the heck out of it. We got the Marlins, the Mighty Marlins, to donate sod to the project, which was great. And then we had exercise equipment, we had bocce ball tournaments, yoga, food trucks, classes were taking place out in the public space, really just trying to show people what it could be and its potential. So again, tactical urbanism, to sum up, it's like a rendering in real time. You can spend thousands of dollars on fancy computer pictures, or you can spend the same amount of money and go out and build something and change people's opinions and understanding of the space for the long term. And I think there's some real value in doing that instead. So unfortunately, I can't get to the rest of the presentation, but I want to keep us on time. And thank you for listening. I'll be around all day. I'd be happy to take your questions, and looking forward to it. Thank you.